Welcome back to the Deep Root Ranch. We're located in north central South Dakota near Selby, Lowry. My wife Marilee and I operate a ranch where we raise cattle. You can see them behind me, some of them. So we've got cattle, we have some crops. We raise a little corn, a little soybeans, and we plant a variety of cover crops, some of which you saw in the last video, the warm season cover crops. We're going to talk today about the role that grasslands play in soil health and why grasslands are important. So I thought it would be appropriate to start in the yard here, where we're looking at a water tank. If you look behind me, you can see we've used an old earth mover tire. There's a company that cuts them in half or cuts the top off. We dig a water line in under the bottom, and these cows just come in and they just drink out of the tank. Okay? We can set them up so we can use them year round, and we've located these tanks around the place in different locations so that the cows don't have to walk all the way back to the yard to drink. It's not that the cows are so busy that they don't have time to come back and drink, but we want them to stay out in the field as much as they can so they're not dragging the manure back to the yard. The manure comes from when they eat the grass, and we want the manure to stay out on the field and fertilize the field and feed the microbes rather than bring it back in here. So we moved away from the yard now. We're out in a kind of behind the yard. You can see a row of trees behind me, and if you span over, you can see cropland that I've planted back to grass over the years. It's quite a stretch of it. So the role of grasslands in soil health. One of the big things with soil health is trying to figure out how to get the water to soak in the ground better. Okay? In this part of the country, we get about 16 to 18 inches of rain on an average year. Okay? We can't buy rain. The closest you can come to buying rain is setting up an irrigation system, and that's pretty expensive. But what we can do is make sure that the rain that comes down soaks in rather than running off. Okay? Properly managed grassland is an incredible way to get the water to soak in the ground. What happens with grass is we end up with something for the rain to hit when it's on the way down. We like to have a mulch on the grasslands. Okay, so we'll come out with the cows and we'll graze the grass, and we try to leave enough out there so that they step some down on the ground and they create a mulch, kind of like your folks might do in their garden. Okay, the mulch does a number of things. It keeps the ground cool, and microbes like to live in a cool environment, and microbes are what cycle the nutrients. They're what feed the soil. Okay, so we get that grass laying down on the ground like a mulch, and that helps. Okay, the raindrops, when they fall from the sky, fall with an incredible amount of velocity. When they hit the ground, it's almost like a hammer pounding on the ground because they've been falling quite a ways and building up speed. So rain falling on bare dirt actually packs it. So if we can have a mulch out there, when the raindrop comes down, it bounces off the grass, and the grass absorbs the shock. Okay? The grass also creates a little bit of a sponge. That mat that you step down creates a sponge that holds that water there and lets it soak in the ground a little slower. Now there's some really cool things going on under the ground too. We talked last time about the microbes and the bacteria and the earthworms. Okay, now the earthworms, all these little bugs and creepy crawlies down there are burrowing around in the ground. The earthworms create little holes and tunnels where they go. They move things around. They'll actually come up on top of the surface and drag pieces of grass and plants down in those holes with them. So they're creating some pores where the water can run in. Okay. Now the roots of the plants interact with the soil. When we think about the soil, we think that, okay, the soil is feeding the plants. But it works both ways. The plants also feed the soil. The roots of the plants give off some things called exudates, okay? And they also give off some things called glomalin, okay? Now, the glomalin is the glue that holds the soil apart and together so that it stays looking like black cottage cheese instead of like sand or really finely packed clay So we want something that looks more like cottage cheese versus something that looks like pudding. Okay? We want some pore spaces in there. We want holes. So the globulant keeps that soil looking like cottage cheese. And the exudates from the plant roots are the sugars that feed the soil, feed the microbes, feed the other bacteria, and they keep things rolling down in the soil. Okay? So grasses are kind of cool in that they have a living root all year long, right? If we plant wheat or corn or one of our monoculture crops, it lives for 2 or 3 months and then it's gone. So we'll come in on cropland and we'll try to plant a cover crop behind it so we can keep a living root out there longer, because the microbes and the bacteria feed off of these living roots. In a grassland environment, we've got a living root there all year long. Even during the winter, when that plant is dormant, it's still living. And so we've got some action going on down there that helps keep the microbes happy, if you will. Okay? Another thing that's cool about the grasses is they send roots down deep into the soil. Not all grasses, but some grasses. When you read about the pioneers and you hear about the pioneers and the settlers riding across this part of South Dakota, they talked about the grass was as high as the saddle horn on the horse. Okay? The grasses they were talking about there were things like big blue stem and Indian grass and switchgrass. Okay? Those are all tall grasses, and they'll get 5 feet tall, sometimes taller. But what's really cool about them is they will send a root down into the soil. Maybe they'll go down in the soil 10 feet. Some even more than that. I'm trying to show you the cows behind me, but the sun's in the wrong direction. So anyway, these roots go way down deep on these native grasses, and the corn plants, the wheat plants, soybeans, things like that. Maybe the root goes down 2 or 3 feet. So the crops use the nutrients that are up in the top 2 feet of the soil, basically. Okay? Grasses can go down deeper, and they can bring up nutrients that we haven't been using for a while, and they do what's called cycling. Okay? They'll take in carbon dioxide from the air through the plant, and they'll send it down through the root, and those exudates, or the sugars coming off the plant, will feed the soil. But the same root that's feeding the soil is also bringing up things like nitrogen, phosphorus, maybe some sulfur, zinc, whatever these plants need to get going. So the cows come along and they eat on these grasses that have the deep roots, and they get some minerals and some vitamins and the sort of thing that they can't find on the shallower rooted plants. Okay? So grasslands are good for the soil, from the soil health. And one of the things that we try to do is we try to include deep-rooted perennials in our rotation. Okay, so instead of planting just corn and beans, or corn, beans, wheat, or whatever, we try to mix in a grass alfalfa mixture and leave it into grass and alfalfa for maybe 3 or 4 years, and then rotate it back out of that back into some kind of cropland production. Okay, that does a whole lot of really neat things for the soil. Okay, so grassland is good for the soil because it helps the rain soak in. Grassland is good for the soil because it helps build up the organic matter in the soil. The organic matter is that sponge in the soil that absorbs the water and holds the nutrients. Okay? Grasslands are good for the livestock, and grasslands are good for wildlife. Okay? You see more wildlife where you have grasslands than you do anywhere else. South Dakota is about half grassland. Okay? When commodity prices go way up, some people are tempted to turn more of our grasslands into cropland. It's good for the cropland side. It's not so good for the wildlife or for the cattle. Okay? So, if you don't have cattle, okay, you don't have grasslands, and you don't have wildlife. Okay? So we want to keep the grasslands around so that people will have cattle, and that they can sustain some income off of the grasslands. And at the same time, that's going to help the wildlife, and it's going to help us all because it helps the water soak in the ground better. And the water that we drink all gets soaked in the ground and goes through a filtering method. And the grasslands are an incredibly good filter for water. Anyway, thanks for joining me. We'll be talking again.